Now, it's true that renewable energy of the sorts that Barack Obama likes to discuss, wind, solar, geothermal, genetically modified gerbils on treadmills, that sort of thing, constitute all of about 2 to 3% of all the electricity we generate in America today. And so some of you seem to be a bit skeptical that we're going to hit an 80% mark, as Barack Obama promised in his State of the Union address, by 2030. And you wonder whether you've ever seen a green economy of the sort that our great Hope Meister is discussing to the nation. Well, we have. Put your hate and skepticism aside for a minute and do realize we have seen green economies before, and we've seen them function quite nicely. We saw them in the 13th century. The entire globe was enthralled with a green economy. We harnessed the wind and the sun and the rain for our energy needs, and we did it quite nicely. But we did give it up several centuries ago in the course of the Industrial Revolution, and it's been in the rear-view mirror ever since. These aren't emerging technologies. They're amongst the most ancient. Well, why did we give them up if they're so wonderful, as we're told? Well, first of all, they're diffuse. It takes a tremendous amount of land to harness these renewables. To give you some idea, a 1 square meter solar panel that you might put on your house would have to operate for 40 full days with full sunlight to deliver the same amount of energy delivered by a gallon of gasoline. That's how diffuse they are. They're very costly. If they weren't costly, we wouldn't have to talk about it in Washington. We would have them on the grid. But even the lobbyists, which represent the renewable energy industry, tell us that without the massive array of tax subsidies and preferences and consumption mandates, if they were to all disappear and they had to compete in the market, their entire industry would disappear overnight. That's how costly they are. They would not exist in a free market. Their own lobbyists tell us so. They're unreliable. It turns out that the wind will not blow on command, neither will the sun shine upon command, and neither will it rain upon command. What many people don't realize is that the 2000 electricity crisis in California, which supposedly was caused entirely by Enron and other profiteers, was triggered because of a severe drought, which took a tremendous amount of hydropower off the grid in the Pacific Northwest. In fact, it was the equivalent of about losing 8 nuclear power plants. And it was that shortage which then began the chain of events that led to the blackouts because of price controls in that state. These are not reliable sources of energy. And they're indeed scarce. Now, this might surprise you because renewable energy is the thing that's not supposed to be scarce, right? The sun's not scarce, the wind's not scarce. But that's the land that can economically produce power from the wind and from the sun and from rain is scarce. Economically viable land is very scarce when it comes to renewable energy, and that's the functional consideration. And this renewable energy is not easily shipped across space or time. Once the wind blows or the sun shines, you create electricity out of it, you better use it or it's gone, because it takes too much money and technological challenge to harness that electricity in a battery so it can be used at some later date. Now, brown energy, the old-fashioned stuff that Barack Obama would have us leave, is everything that renewable energy is not. It is not diffuse. It is very highly concentrated. The amount of energy in a lump of coal or that gallon of gasoline is far beyond anything we get out of renewables. It's not costly. It's tremendously cheap relative to the alternatives. It is not unreliable. It's extremely reliable. Whenever you want to burn the gas or the coal or turn on the nuclear power plant, all of those things are going to happen upon command. These are not scarce fuels as well. If they were scarce, we wouldn't have this discussion. They would be expensive, and we'd have renewable energy. And it's easily shipped across space and time. We can store it. We can move it. Transportation costs aren't that great. So, but my main point is that if renewable energy is such a great investment as Barack Obama says, if someday in the near future all of these facts will change because of technological innovation and all that, and that's also obvious to all right-thinking Chicago law professors, then why in the world do we need to subsidize it? Why do we need to put guns to businessmen's head and force them to consume it? Why does it need any government help whatsoever to have such obvious merits? Well, in Washington, where I'm from, we hear 5 arguments for why the gun needs to be pulled out and why we need to force this sort of technology down America's throat. The most fashionable argument, of course, is the one we heard during the State of the Union address, during Super Bowl Sunday, during virtually every gathering where you find Democrats, is that we need to create jobs, and we are going to create an economic recovery largely through green jobs. Endless studies are marshaled about all of this sort of thing. But it's interesting, if you look at the calculations and the studies which promote this green jobs argument, you find that it is far shoddier than anything Enron ever offered its investors. First of all, we don't count jobs lost from brown energy. So we count all the jobs we create in the green energy sector, and all the guys who work in coal mines or oil refineries or in natural gas fields, their lost jobs don't count. So it's like a cost-benefit analysis where only the benefits are counted and never the costs. Secondly, they don't count the lost jobs from higher energy costs. We know energy prices will be higher if we force expensive energy onto the grid. How many jobs will be lost throughout the economy because higher energy costs reduce employment and reduce incentives to hire new employees? Who knows? These studies don't look at that either. We also count bureaucrats. If it takes 10,000 new bureaucrats in Washington to oversee the green economy, that's 10,000 jobs created by the green jobs monolith. And we relabel jobs. If you're the iconic Wichita lineman who goes about fixing power lines in the Midwest, you're currently not a green jobber. But the minute that that utility becomes green, meets some threshold that pleases Chicago law professors, then he will have a green job. So these aren't necessarily new jobs being created at all. We're going to relabel a lot of existing jobs. And we assume that all the jobs, that any new jobs do create, are going to be created in the United States, whereas about 90% of the manufacturing base for wind and solar equipment comes from overseas. So to the extent to which any new jobs might be created by this new demand, they're going to be created in Germany or in China, and they're not going to be created here. Now, the empirical examinations of this green jobs state are fairly unimpressive for the administration. President Obama likes to hold up Spain as an example of an economy that has been thriving with green jobs, but a recent study from an academic in Spain finds that 2 jobs have been lost for every green job created in Spain because of the higher energy costs associated with renewable energy. In Germany, we don't have such a happy calculation, but we do find that it's cost the German government $240,000 to create every green job in that country. Nevertheless, let's assume everything I'm telling you is incorrect, however, and it just happens to be that green energy is more labor intensive than fossil fuels, which, by the way, if the windmills and the solar panels are working fine, I'm not sure where the jobs are occurring unless we're going to fix them all the time. But if indeed it is more labor intensive, which I'm almost certain it's not, but if it were, that's not an argument for green energy, it's an argument against green energy, because by and large, you don't create wealth and economic growth by maximizing the inputs associated with production. You do so by minimizing the inputs associated with production. If our only point in economic policy in Washington now is to create jobs, regardless of wealth creation, regardless of whether it makes economic sense, and it's just a jobs game, well, I've got far better ideas. I'm from Iowa. One of the things that occurs to me is we can ban farm equipment and food imports. We'd create a lot of jobs in the Midwest that way. But no sane economist would embrace that policy regardless, and no sane economist really takes these green jobs arguments very seriously. The second argument we hear is that we need to end our reliance on foreign oil. Now, regardless of how you feel about foreign oil, which is a whole topic for a different conversation, only about 2% of our electricity is generated by oil. So you can build all the solar or wind power plants in the world and not reduce foreign oil consumption virtually at all. But what you will reduce is reduce consumption of coal and natural gas. Do we rely on foreign sources of coal and natural gas? No, we export coal. And because of the revolution in the natural gas industry, we'll soon be net exporters of natural gas as well. So this isn't going to do anything about foreign oil, regardless of how you feel about it. Now, of course, they say, well, that's all well and good, but the battery technology we have, we're going to be able to run our cars on batteries, whether it's plug-in electric hybrids or supersized golf carts, and that way we can harness all this renewable energy, the wind and the solar and all that, and that's how we're going to displace oil. So we need these batteries, and the batteries are coming courtesy of the taxpayer, massive subsidy, and our ownership of GM. Well, an economist who works for the Obama administration today, so I will cite an economic study from somebody working over there, so you know I'm not cherry picking things, tells us that the battery prices for these cars would have to decline from about $1,300 per kilowatt hour to about $500 per kilowatt hour before electric powered vehicles can compete with gasoline. In other words, you have to see a massive reduction in battery prices. Now, of course, people say that's all on the horizon because the government is going to get economies of scale going. These are infant industries, and that day will soon come. But the National Academy of Science reported last year that lithium-ion batteries, the stuff that we use for these cars, are fairly mature mature technologies, and no massive cost reductions are on the horizon. If anything, these are technologies just as mature as the internal combustion engine. And not even a big cap and trade bill would do the trick. You would have to have a $100 per ton tax on carbon before electric hybrid vehicles can compete with gasoline, or some series of events which gave you $5 gasoline. So if gasoline costs $5 a gallon or more over the lifetime of your next car purchase, a plug-in electric hybrid vehicle might break even for you. We're a long ways from that today, so I don't think ending reliance on foreign oil is going to happen. We're told we need to assist with our transition away from increasingly scarce fossil fuels. So if nothing else, we need to begin to hedge our bets and look for fuels other than oil and coal and natural gas. But of course, we're not running out of coal or natural gas, just to the contrary. In fact, if we were running out of coal, environmentalists wouldn't worry so much about climate change. They worry because we could consume coal for centuries on end for our energy needs, and that's what concerns Greenpeace. But we're not running out of this stuff. And with natural gas now, we're certainly not running out of that either. So this is a conversation about oil. Again, that's another speech for another time. But the upshot here is that if and when oil does become increasingly scarce, its price will go up. It will provide signals in the economy for people to take their money away from oil and to invest in other things. And markets will adjust and the transition will occur without smart law professors from Chicago trying to manage the situation. One thing markets are really, really good at is transmitting information about scarcity consumers via the price signal. In fact, that usually bothers liberal Democrats because they don't like the fact that a storm in the Gulf of Mexico or something similar creates scarcity and thus creates high prices. But it's exactly that dynamic which will steer the economy naturally away from fossil fuels and oil and towards something else if and when the time comes that this scarcity, allegedly always on the horizon, ever comes to pass in the fuel industry. Now, we're told, well, all these things might be true, but the government involvement in green energy will create cheap green energy because government tax dollars are like magic pixie dust we sprinkle on things that turns ugly economic ducklings into beautiful economic swans. Well, that generally doesn't happen. Despite all the talk about the Apollo and Manhattan projects proving to the contrary, remember, those are projects in which we had an objective to get a man to the moon, and cost was virtually no object. That's not our objective here. What we're trying to do, if there was an equivalent narrative, is to get a man to the moon cheaper than it might take to get that man to Moscow on US Air. In other words, there's an economic component here. Have we ever seen the government do this sort of thing through massive involvement to create turn an uneconomic technology into an economic one? No. Is nuclear power too cheap to meter yet? We've spent $61 billion subsidizing the nuclear power industry since 1961, and nuclear power is still the most expensive source of conventional electricity on the grid. It's cheaper than wind and solar, but it's more expensive all in than natural gas or coal. Do we use syn fuels yet? Nope, we don't use syn fuels in our cars yet. Have all the subsidies for wind and solar done anything? No. Is ethanol any more competitive than it was when Dwayne Andreas took the Congress hostage in 1978 and began the ethanol program? No. The reason why is that when government decides which technologies will be winners in the future, they make these decisions with a political calculus. Politicians will make decisions about what to subsidize and how much to subsidize them and where those subsidies should go based on how many votes were associated with all those decisions. It's only by the sheerest of chance that what looks good for politics will also look good for the economy or for consumers, for the energy markets in total. So the idea that government can pick winners better than the private sector and can steer our transition away from one set of investments to another is the faith that politicians on the make can somehow get really, really lucky in their full-bore attempt to win votes and coincidentally make good bets. I find that fairly hard to believe. But let me conclude with the idea that despite what you've heard, I'm not against renewable energy. I'm not a hater. I don't dislike wind or solar power or anything of the kind. But if and when those technologies make economic sense, if and when they are promising, if and when technological breakthroughs look realistic, then profit-happy capitalists on the make will be happy to park tremendous amounts of dollars in every one of those investments that make sense. I know a number of people in energy hedge funds and in the energy business who I talk to who are actually a bit more bullish about renewable energy than I am. And they say the problem we have here is there's far more money sloshing around on Wall Street looking to fund good battery technology, stuff in the solar or wind industry, than there are good investments to park the money. Virtually everything that these people in New York see, that Google is picking up, and Silicon Valley wonder kids who think they're going to be captains of the next energy industry, are all investments guys in New York looked at and said, this is nuts. I'm not going to put my money here. These are real long shots that look very unpromising to me. But they're picked up by Silicon Valley. Guys who really don't know a whole lot about energy, but they're masters of the universe, and so they take their money there. Now that's fine. I have no complaint with that, and maybe they'll win that lottery ticket and make a lot of money. But the fact is, when every single investor in Wall Street and in San Francisco and elsewhere says no, 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 no to a set of investments, those are the wonder projects that then come to Washington. That then we try to talk politicians into saying, look, look at all these wonderful opportunities being bypassed. As long as people in the private sector want to make profit and are allowed to make profit by their government, there will be no good investments that get overlooked. Now, every once in a while, the government may end up parking some money on a lottery ticket and winning big. But that sort of strategy is not the one that I'd want to bet on going into the 21st century in the energy field. Anyway, thank you for your time, and thanks for coming today, and good night. Good afternoon.